Greetings, diners, and welcome to the third anniversary show for the Doomstead Diner. We've been doing blogs and ranting and doing our interviews now for 3 years, since 2012. And today, in celebration of this accomplishment, if you will, I've invited back a few of my old friends. I've got Hugo Barty here, who runs the blog Cassandra's Legacy. Oh, I'm sorry, Resource Crisis. You renamed it.
Well, I'm a bit uncertain about that. Maybe we will come back to the old name.
Okay. Well, either way, I've got it up. I did change it on Dino Links to Resource Crisis,
and then the link is the same.
Yeah, the actual link itself is the same. The title has just changed. Steve Ludlam from Economic Undertow, another old friend, is here, and Steve has been discussing the problems of economics and oil depletion with me and with his very large group of readers for a number of years, even before the diner got started. And after him is Monsta666. Monsta is my co-host on all of these broadcasts or podcasts and so forth. About the only place he doesn't do the multimedia with me is in the rants, which I do all by my lonesome. And then following that is my fellow founder and admin for the diner, Surly. And Surly also handles our social media presence, such as it is, Facebook and Twitter, and contributes quite a number of very interesting articles and an interesting perspective as well. He's a former activist in the Occupy movement and has a lot of wonderful contributions, made a lot of wonderful contributions to the diner. Anyway, speaking of wonderful contributions, one of the news items of the last month or so is that a pioneer in the field of resource depletion and overshoot questions, William Catton, who wrote the book Overshoot, passed away recently at the age of 89. And this has been cause for several people. John Michael Greer wrote an article regarding the passing of William Catton, and Hugo himself also, I believe, mentioned it on his blog. So I thought we might take a minute or two here at the beginning of the broadcast to remember Bill Catton and just give some thoughts on what his contribution was, how it affected us, if it did affect us overall since the time that original stuff came out. And so I'll just go take a quick tour through our group here and see if you got any thoughts to contribute here. Hugo, you want to start on this one?
Well, I could say that William Catton was, no doubt, a pioneer in the field. Personally, I sort of missed that book. I read it only later, much later, when I was preparing my book on the limits to growth. And then you discover that at the time, in the 1970s, there was an intellectual climate in which these kind of ideas were bubbling up or growing, and then many people were expressing this set of ideas. A lot of what was being said at that time has been lost and forgotten. So just a few important contributions have survived, and we remember this contribution. And Catton, no doubt, is one of the fundamental contributor to a certain kind of view of the world. And his main contribution was this concept of overshoot, which is a term which he invented and has been extensively used later on. Even the group or the limits to growth used this term. Although it is not, it is nothing really difficult to understand or contrary to common experience. If you want to examine the history of this concept, of the concept of overshoot, you can see it expressed earlier on by Garrett Hardin, for instance, with the idea of the tragedy of the commons, or by Rachel Carson with the idea of Silent Spring. Earlier on in 19th century, it was clearly expressed by by the economists of the time when they were studying this limitation of resources, which was a basic idea of the early economics. And William Stanley Jevons was probably the first who expressed the concept of overshoot very clearly and in a very modern sense. So we have this progression of ideas which come from the 19th century, when we were already starting to see at a certain distance the limits to growth, and now we see them at a very close distance, I would say. So that I think I'll stop here, but that I think is what I could say about the book by William Catton.
Yeah, his viewpoint and his ideas definitely were built on the shoulders of giants, if you will. Uh, but his phrasing and whatnot is stuff that we're using now, and it appears that he came about in a time when that was becoming very important to people, and so there was talk about it going on. But then, in the interim, going through the 80s, late 70s, 80s, and well into the 90s, discussion of these things seemed to have disappeared off the map. And I think Steve, in our recording chat, brought up some of the reasons why that stuff has disappeared off the map. Steve, you want to talk about some of your thoughts on Catton and how this is discussed these days, and why it isn't discussed or wasn't discussed for so long?
Well, the reason is really pretty simple. I mean, we're in a sponsor-driven environment, a media environment, and businesses want to sell products. They want to sell houses, cars, furniture, flat-screen TVs, air conditioners, and whatnot. And they're going to exclude anything that gets in the way of the sponsors selling their products. So that's why we don't have a discussion about things like overshoot, and, economic and environmental crises. They're going to take all these products away from us. We just ignore it, and it's a strategy. It's a media strategy, and it runs through our whole culture because our culture is media driven. And so Mr. Catton, I didn't know him personally. I listened to him talk in a convention a couple of years ago, and he's a very smart and had a grip on the situation. But by having a grip on the situation, he's automatically excluded from the conversation. He has nothing to say. He can't sell products. Therefore, we're not going to listen to him. We're not going to get a chance to listen to him. What we do is going to be part of. This is what happens if you don't play by the rules. You turn out to be like this guy. He's crazy, see? So, and you're right. It all happened right around 1980. People blame it on Ronald Reagan, but you really have to blame it on the people that elected Ronald Reagan, because that's what they wanted. They wanted product. They wanted money. They wanted comfort. They didn't really care about anything. Whether going down this road is going to bankrupt people ultimately never mattered. That was never part of the function. Just never part of the calculation. All we want to do is give us the products, give us the money. We don't care whether you steal it or not. Just give us some. And that's how we've gotten to the state that we're in right now.
Well,
I think
I think that people will buy whatever is sold to them as a group. When you look at the population at large, and you depend on leadership. Most people are sheeple. They're followers, not leaders. So this question of who is responsible, is it the leaders themselves that are responsible, or is it the people who elected those leaders that are
Well, it's really
responsible?
the people.
And
I
and
mean,
this shift, I personally don't like the shifting of the blame to the population at large. I mean, by making everybody to blame, then nobody's to blame. And,
you
and
got two
this is a
choices.
this is a problem I've always had.
That's two
what I
choices.
would like to add,
Okay.
what I'd like to add is, I think there's a bunch of things at work here. I think what Steve said about the media manipulating the message probably is the biggest factor. But I think the other factor is the fact that people don't want to hear bad news. So when they hear it, they tend to be more, and if there's something that brings out good news, they will tend to accept it without very much scrutiny. So even though there was a lie, people wanted to hear it. And I think also the other thing is the environmental movement kind of changed over time. It became like it was more important to get a message that was palatable rather than one that was based on reality. I think that's the difference between some of these early environmentalists and the ones that you see today.
Yeah, definitely the whole environmental movement has been was co-opted in many ways, and if you want to call it, sold out uh, to the idea of green industry, if you will. It's green because we're recycling and so forth. So all these ideas that we could somehow use these methods to continue to live the lifestyle that we want to live, but that it would be healthy and good for the earth in some way. But it turns out that almost all of these so-called green technologies have their own blowback. David, you haven't chipped in here yet. I'm wondering if you've got some ideas about William Catton, about Overshoot, so forth, that you might want to contribute.
Just briefly, I would just I took note of when he passed. I was aware that he had written the book Overshoot, so I wanted to know more about him because I had actually never read the book, although I'd heard the term. I guess besides providing Overshoot as part of our vocabulary, he helped frame up the entire set of discussions that we often engage in on the diner. I found it also interesting that apparently after he had this book written, he had it written in the early 70s, but he had to shop it for 7 or 8 years until he found a publisher that didn't assume that the market for books on the ecology was absolutely saturated, so it didn't get published until 1980. It's a strange but true element. But I guess we owe him a lot for being a bit of a trailblazer in putting together a framework for discussion. And I will make one other observation. Over the Christmas holiday, a friend of mine observed to me that we have prehistoric emotions, medieval institutions, and modern problems, and we try to solve them in that framework. It's really it seems to me that William Catton observed that a lot of our entire cultural heritage came about when there was the carrying capacity of the planet far exceeded the human load placed upon it. I mean, it's been in our lifetime that we've seen that has been inversed, and so we're trying to solve our problems with habits of mind developed at times when the reality was completely different.
Well, I think that's particularly true in the area of economics, which seems to have developed entirely in a time when resources seemed infinite, and the ability to pitch waste into the environment also seemed infinite. And so those costs, pollution and things like that, are not accounted for in modern economic theory, at least until somewhat recently people have started to look at those ideas and costs and how they affect our total ability to live on the planet and run an economic system. With the economic system in mind, the next area that I wanted to talk about here is what's going on with the Greek situation. As most diners are aware of, and most of the viewers of the Collapse Blogosphere, I think, know right now, is that Greece is in the midst of another one of its periodic crisis moments. The new government, as I like to call it, of Greece has called Syriza, has been elected and came in with a lot of promises about changing what's going on in terms of austerity that's been dropped down on them by extra governmental lenders, the IMF, the European Union, and so forth, and attempting to get some equity going in their society. But on the other side of the line, the people who hold Greek debt don't want to forgive it, and the Greeks can't pay it off, and so they've reached kind of a impasse, a standstill with this. And so once again, I'm going to go to the panel here and see what people's thoughts are on who's going to capitulate, if anybody. Is the Greek Syriza government going to capitulate to the IMF and to Brussels and give in to what they want because they just can't live without the euro? Or on the other hand, will the Brussels sprouts be the ones to capitulate, because if they eject Greece from the euro, basically the whole house of cards comes flying down. So in this case, I think I'll let Steve lead us off as our resident expert on economics. Steve, got any clue here as to which way this is going to go on Monday? Or
it's going to go on the way it's been going on until it can't go on anymore. I mean, nothing's going to change. And my guess is that another year, everybody will be looking for the next Greek government because the Syriza people didn't do what they promised to do, which is to jettison the euro and start over again, repudiate their debts. And, they can't do that. The Greeks, I mean, you can break it down. It's very complicated, but the bottom line is that the euro represents gasoline. So if the Greeks don't have the euro officially, then they're going to have to get the euro unofficially. If they can't get the euro, then they have to go to the dollar. This is what they did in the old days before there was a euro. They bought British pounds, or they bought German marks, or they bought dollars. And the currency markets, they use that to buy petroleum that they use. And it's not just the Greeks, it's all the other importers in Europe, which is most of the countries. So if they don't have the euro, which is presumably their own currency, then they have to get some other usable currency that they use in trade. And they're going to pay through the nose in order to get it. That's why the little countries wanted to be in the euro in the first place, because they could get the same purchasing power as the Germans without being amalgamated with the Germans. So they never worked that out. So that's why the whole thing's blowing up right now. But they'll never get rid of the euro unless the whole thing dissolves, and then they go to some other currency that's outside of Europe, like the dollar. So, what you were saying about dollarizing the euro is a possibility. I mean, dollarizing Europe is a possibility.
Yeah, it could happen. And I talked a little bit about this with Hugo, too. So, and Hugo is living in Italy, which may be the next one down the daisy chain after Greece with similar situations. So, Hugo, some of your thoughts on where that's going?
Well, many things have been said about the crisis, and a lot of the crisis is perceived as financial. There is a financial problem. There is a question of whether the euro is useful for the Greek economy or not, or whether you can exit the euro will save Greece from the present crisis. The problem, I think, is much deeper than that. The problem is not financial. The problem is structural. It is structural all over the Mediterranean. And I took some time a few months ago to try to understand the dependence of countries to mineral commodities and to oil in particular. And what you see if you examine the situation is that those countries which import more oil in relation to the size of their economy are those which are in the worst condition. That is especially true for Greece. Greece, according to my data, imports about 6% in terms of costs, monetary costs of fossil energy or oil from abroad. Italy much less, but so Greece is in a worse situation, and those nations, those countries which are doing much better, like Switzerland, like Germany, are importing much less in terms of mineral resources to the economy, so they don't have this burden. And my opinion is that the crisis is a structural factor correlated to the costs of importing the commodities which make the economy work. And so you can stay in the euro, you can exit the euro, you can negotiate the debt, you can pay the debt, you may refuse to pay the debt, but in the end, the problem is there. It is a planetary problem because we are facing an increasing cost of mineral commodities, and this increasing cost is structural, is affecting our economy. It is not a financial problem. It is not something that can be solved by financial tricks, and probably financial tricks are going to make things worse.
Yeah, I think it is missed that it's not really an economic problem. People blame debt, blame it on debt, blame it on government mismanagement and the welfare state, and so forth and so on as the causes of these problems. But the reality is that the problems lie in a ever increasing population with a ever decreasing amount of available resource, and that has to be distributed out somehow. The monetary system has traditionally served as the means to make that distribution, but it really only can function when there's a substantial surplus. Once you reach the point that you're either very near exactly what you need or, in fact, beneath what you need to supply the population as a whole, somebody somewhere is going to get hurt and be at the short end of the stick. And the people at the short end of the stick here are the weakest nations, and those nations are getting triaged off the economy the first. And the Greeks are among the first, although really, I mean, there are countries down in Africa and the Middle East and so forth that have been triaged off of this economy for quite some time already, and they actually never even joined it. So the point is, at this point, there's just not enough oil to go around for everybody to be living the lifestyle of happy motoring that we managed to live here in the fascist states of America for the last 50 years or so. Mansa, David, you got any thoughts on what's going on in Italy and Spain and Greece on the monetary level? Where you think that might be going? As a banker there, Mansa, you might have some ideas.
I think in terms of Greece, I tend to feel that they will make a deal and this party will capitulate with their promises. of that opinion, although you can't rule out that they will actually follow through with what they say. But I think they'll be similar to the Scots. You know, they talk tough, but when the moment comes, they will realize the gravity of their situation. It would be, I think, good in the long run if they stood firm, but I don't see it happening, because the whole thing is you've got the whole contagion effect going on, and if Greece falls, then I can't imagine Italy or Spain being that much far behind, and if they start falling, then the whole project goes down the drain. So I think this is just an option that won't be even considered. So I think the status quo will be maintained until there's some sort of black swan event, as it were, that causes, and I don't think we're quite there. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's very hard to see either way, which and the market itself discounts the possibility that the euro will break up or that the Greeks will leave. I mean, nobody can believe it will happen, and it hasn't happened so many times already that it's like the boy who cried wolf. No matter how bad it is, no matter that nobody can see a real solution here, there's a magical thinking effect that, even though we can't figure out how to solve the problem, those smartest guys in the room in Brussels are going to figure it out on Monday. But it's real hard to figure out.
It's just absolutely, it's unthinkable to think that the Eurocrats would possibly allow Greece to detach from the euro and from the eurozone. I summon up the image of somebody tugging on a thread from a sweater and then unraveling the entire sweater. The potential for that, I just can't imagine under any circumstances Brussels permitting that to happen. But then, it's in a larger sense, really, we're all Greeks. I mean, because this is just what's happening with Greece is just a subset of the larger issue of the Ponzi scheme of debt foisted upon all of us by central bankers the world over. So it's it's all of us can see this happening, and we say, well, just common sense tells you it's going to fall in upon itself sometime. But is it going to be this week? Probably not. Meanwhile, Cyprus and Syriza are going to have to find a way to sell whatever solution they come up with to a crowd of people who, even today, according to an article I saw on Zero Hedge, were rallying. Tens of thousands of pro-government supporters taken to Syntagma Square to make sure Syriza knows how its bread is buttered. So this ought to be a very interesting week.
Yeah, the Syriza government is really between a rock and a hard place there. I mean, they've got, tens of thousands of people who are out there, in support of them, for a change. You got people surrounding the government buildings who are going, yeah, rah, rah, our government, we love you guys. I mean, you turn around and just disappoint that crowd, and they're going to have a complete turnaround, 100% opposite reaction, and they'll be, stampeding into the buildings to basically run those folks out of there on a stake, tar and feather and the whole business there. So it's really hard to imagine how they can capitulate and how they can manage to politically phrase whatever they do in order to satisfy their population. If they don't do anything short of, or they do anything short of not living up to some very, very difficult to live up to promises in terms of austerity, in terms of rehiring civil service workers, raising their pension allotment, I think practically doubling it, and so forth. So they've got a lot of promises they made that these people are expecting to be in some way fulfilled, but that it's almost impossible to imagine how they can be fulfilled. So that aspect is a major problem, and that's the Morton's fork there. That's the quandary, and why it's so hard to picture how it's going to come out tomorrow. And it is D-Day. I mean, it's at least it's been phrased as D-Day from Jero and Dieselboom or whatever his name is. That if you guys don't capitulate on Monday, then we're cutting you off. Period. End of sentence. And there'll be no more money forthcoming, and with no more money forthcoming, then they can't pay their pensions and so forth.
They're not going to do that either. I mean, look, let's a thought experiment. Let's just say Greece reintroduces the drachma, but they keep the eurozone intact. In other words, the euro doesn't disintegrate. You still have the euro. Well, the euro isn't going to disappear. The Greeks will still have the euro coming into their country. So they'll have two currencies in the country instead of one. But it'll be a black market euro instead of official euro. Well, all of the Greek creditors will want to get paid in euros. They won't want drachma. So the drachmas will wind up being foisted off on the same people that are Cyprus's supporters. So they'll be stuck with a worthless currency that's good for absolutely nothing. They'll wind up trying to get rid of, however fast they can, get rid of these drachmas so they can get their hands on the black market euros. So the euro will even become harder to find in Europe. This is Greece, a very small country, but even so, there would be such a demand for euros in Greece for a black market, because there would be such a high rate that it would be paid for them there in real money, that you would have all these distortions. There would even be more deflation in Europe than there is right now. And that is if Greece reintroduces drachma and keeps everything intact. There's always a possibility they reintroduce the drachma, and the next thing you know is Germany jumps out of the eurozone. In that case, all bets are off. It'd just be complete madness, and everybody's looking for a currency that they either can't find on one hand, or a currency that's worth something on the other. And all this could happen really fast. Because once you get the incipient currency crisis and bank credit crisis, then it tends to snowball really, really quickly. Before you know it, you're in a situation like you have in Argentina right now. The currency is losing a lot of worth. It's depreciating really rapidly. That's what's happening with the euro right now. Everybody's uncertain about what's going to happen, and nobody really knows. But people are going to improvise. I mean, what Ugo said makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like we got a limited number of resources. We're going to triage some people, but guys that are being kicked out of the lifeboat, like the Greeks, they're going to hang on for dear life. It's like, we want to get rid of the debts. We want to keep the euro. And that's why Syriza got elected in the first place. Basically, they promised they were going to repudiate Greece's debts. And in fact, they used to have a party platform. The first thing they were going to do is they would do a forensic audit of all the Greek debts, and they were going to find out which of it was odious. And my guess is half of Greece's debt is odious. It benefited the bankers in Frankfurt and in other parts of the world. It benefited the elites in Athens, and didn't do jack for any ordinary Greek. So that debt could simply be, just repudiated as odious. And they don't talk about that anymore. But that was a big part of their appeal. It's like they were going to look at the debt and say, well, some of this debt is just basically an inside deal. It's a crooked, bankster activity. And we have no obligation to pay any of it. And, that's why Syriza got elected. This is my opinion. I'm not in Greece. I'm just looking at it from a distance. And if they don't repudiate that debt, then they're going to be in hot water. It's where are they going to go? What are they going to do next? I mean, they either got to borrow or they got to repudiate. There's no third way. They can't pay it back. There's no way the Greeks can pay back their debts. In fact, the Germans couldn't repay the Greek debts. So the Chinese couldn't repay the Greek debts. It's just too big.
And the fact of the matter is that globally we're bankrupt, and it's a moving around, it's a pushing around of global debt, one person to another. I think, Steve, you've often pointed out that you've got tycoons, groups of people who take on the debt, but their objective is to make everybody else pay the debt. They don't pay it. They just they just take it out. And that's basically what you have on a nation-state level, is you've got all these nation-states that have taken out debt in the name of the people who live there, and want to foist that debt then back on those people to pay it, but the people don't have ability to pay it. So you're
All they
between
can do is borrow again. That's the only way they can repay, is to borrow more and more and more.
Yeah, and that's so it goes. So it goes. Anyway, to move on in the topics of conversation for today, the next area is geopolitics, which is the nonsense that's going on in Ukraine, and the demonization of Putin, and the claims and counterclaims of who's at fault. There's obviously there's a huge component of energy that's involved in this, but let's avoid that for the moment, trying to analyze that. But I'd just like to look at the propaganda aspect of what's going on. Senator Daniel Inhofe, in the effort to further demonize Russia, issued out or passed out some photographs that purportedly showed that Russia had invaded Ukraine, when in fact these pictures were from Georgia back in around 2008. And they basically were caught with their pants down as pitching out completely false propaganda. Surly, as a geopolitics follower here, you got any thoughts on this latest gaffe by our government and in their efforts to show that the Russians are the ones responsible?
Do I have thoughts? Yeah, you might say so.
Yeah, I figured you did.
Yeah, well, I'm generally good for a mewling or puking on subjects like this. I will tell you that James Inhofe did his case no good. I know that there's this bill in the Senate, led by war crazy John McCain and some of the usual suspects like Ted Cruz and John Cornyn and Rubio and Catton and all these people, to authorize the U.S. to send lethal weaponry and require a comprehensive strategy for Ukraine from the same guy that they like to regard as the Kenyan usurper. Well, good luck with that. Quite frankly, I don't have any idea what's going on with Ukraine. I read the Vineyard of the Saker and other blogs to try to get some idea, but none of us have.
You are a subversive.
What's that?
You are a subversive if you read the blog of the Saker. Be careful.
Yes, I'm a Bolshevik without portfolio.
Yeah, I do the same. I read the same blog. A lot of people read that blog, but I don't think many people will confess that they do. So you are very brave.
Well, excuse me, I hear doors slamming outside my house. Let me go check and see who's inside these black people.
We're all Saker readers on the Diner. It's one of the popular blogs for us, and we're all a bunch of reds.
but nobody. I mean, the fact is, I'm no apologist for Putin either. Although, unlike some of our own senators, he did keep us out of war in Syria last year, so he's got that going for him. But is he likely to be lying? Is he likely to be, everybody is jockeying for position. We're sitting here looking. We're like looking at the flickering images on the wall of Plato's cave. We don't have any idea what's really going on. So the smartest among us will probably not venture an opinion. Since I'm not among the smartest here, I'll just tell you that if the case for aiding the Ukraine was so clear-cut, we probably wouldn't have had to install our own banderist, read Nazi government in Ukraine to make it happen. I'm just there's no good guys here, and it's frightening. But meanwhile, I mean, while these guys diddle over this and worry and try to find a mechanism to send lethal aid to Ukraine, we're playing footsie with World War III. I find it pretty troublesome, and I'd like to pay attention to it.
Yeah, the political situation that is evolving is, becoming so dangerous in so many ways, and the people who are running it uh, are behind the scenes for the most part. I mean, the people running it are not Obama and even our congressmen and senators like Inhofe. It comes from NATO. It comes from basically a shadow type of uh, organization and government that is working at the behest of the military-industrial complex, the oil industry, the energy industry, and so forth. And this business has been the case for a long time, really, going back to World War II and World War I even. So uh, it's very impenetrable, and you're constantly in the position of speculating on what's actually going on versus what is being reported as going on. And you've got these different organizations. You got your individuals like Saker, and then you got Russia Today, and there have been some marvelous battles on Russia Today between some of those commentators and commentators from CNN and other organs of our local MSM as to who's telling the truth and who's basically vomiting up puke on the MSM. So what can you do besides speculate? You got to try to figure out what's going on somehow, and speculation appears to be the only way to do that. And just close up here today. I just want to have one more topic I want to talk about you guys with, which is really all of this stuff together. We're 3 years on the diner and have been successfully growing readership and listenership, and there's many other people out there in the blogosphere too, and so you see there's this discussion that's ongoing. But to me, it remains very diffuse. It remains something that is not unified, and because it's not unified, that is what makes it much harder for anybody else who's from outside coming in. Somebody comes in and there's just a cacophony of ideas. You bop around from website to website and you get 60,000 different opinions on it, and pretty soon you're in an information overload situation, and you don't know what the truth is anymore. So I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts or any ideas on how the blogosphere and how all the pundits and all of us can in some way unify to become something of a more effective movement. It's almost the electronic version of Occupy, if you will, that because you got no leaders, you have no clear message. And without a clear message, how do you get people moving in any given direction? So I'll throw this one open. Who wants to be first? It's a tough topic.
I think with this,
Nobody's
Nobody wants to
silent.
say anything. You are such a subversive, Roger, that I will deny that I have ever been here. And what you're seeing is just an avatar of mine, but it's not really me. It is not Ugo. It's another face. I'm sleeping right now a little. Anyway.
I'm using a robot Hugo. It's
a robot. I'm a droid, actually. As you know, this is my droid face. And but anyway, there's an interesting point. If you read the Saker's blog, you know the term submarine in the sand. Do you know?
Well, I honestly don't read it often enough to know that term now. So
you do. So it looks like. No, a submarine in the sand, it is because it says that the people are afraid to admit that they read his blog. And so they are like submarines buried in the sand. They cannot move, they cannot communicate with anyone except that they know that they contact with the Saker, but they cannot admit it. And so he received some nice letters especially from the United States. All the submarines in the sand suddenly emerged, and they discovered the presence of each other. So it's an interesting talk we had today, because if you read the Saker's blog, you have the sensation that you are the only one in the world who reads it. You don't want to admit it, but at least 3 people tonight for Italy.
Well, we know Dmitry Orlov reads it too, and in fact,
of course, he is a big subversive too. How come that we are all such subversive? I mean, I'm just a droid, a CIA droid. Said I'm here to spy on you. Don't worry about that. So keep going. I just report to my bosses later.
All right, Hugo. Well, just tell him I'm basically a good guy, okay?
Yeah, we're harmless guys.
Subversive.
This much I can say.
Yeah.
We are not dangerous.
Right, exactly. But back to the topic at hand. Steve, any ideas on making the blogosphere a little bit more effective in communicating? Is there anything that we can do that we are not doing right now, or is it all just a hopeless situation?
I don't know what hopeless means. So, I mean, this is a very difficult topic. Most people don't spend any time thinking about this, and when they do, they take a drug to change their mind. So, they're interested in other things. I mean, if this was a sports blog, there would probably be 50,000, just in this town. If it was a city that had a major league baseball or football team in it, 50,000 is probably underestimated. So, the topic itself is limiting, and it's just the way it is. And, you have satisfaction knowing that you're on the right side of history. And then what? There's nothing else in it. It's not really rewarding. Somebody, I don't remember, some smart guy said, you don't get rich, prognosticating the apocalypse. And that's basically what we're talking about here, is that our luxurious way of life is kind of going down the toilet. So that's not very much fun. I don't know how you make it very much fun. People pay attention when something bad happens. Right? There was a lot more interest in, what's happening in oil markets when the price crashed 50%. But, that's replaced, by some other, I'm sure there's a Kardashian that's going to get arrested for, drunk driving or something. That's going to push oil prices off the news. Nobody's going to care. And it'll be some other crisis. So it's a very much a episodic thing. And, I think it's just a matter of, just try to keep a sense of humor. That's all you have.
That's basically what I do try to do.
You got a sense of humor. You can laugh about it a little bit, but it's very hard to change things. I mean, I'm not saying you're not going to be able to change anything in the future. I think right now people are going to go to the bitter, bitter end with the status quo. They're going to do everything in their power to make business as usual, keep functioning until it falls apart. And then they're going to say, now what do we do? Can somebody please help us? And even then they'll be denying. So there'll still be a big level of denial. Even if there are 5 people left on planet Earth, they're wandering around the desert, they're going to say, well, if we could just get a couple of bank loans here, we could build a big city here, we'll have growth again. I mean, it's just...
Yep, denial right to the bitter end. It does appear to be the case. If we've got folks on the diner, or at least one, who no matter what evidence you dig up and show that what's occurring here with peak oil is in fact occurring and has in fact been well predicted by many people, he just continues to deny that the people predicted it or that it's happening. And what do you do in the face of that when the denial is so strong? But we battle against it on the diner on a daily basis, and in terms of the sense of humor about it all, I personally try to keep one and throw in a few black humor jokes into my rants. I hope people don't think that I'm being flippant when I do that sort of thing. But you if you don't keep a sense of humor about it, it's just too damn depressing. And so you don't want to go through life with a black cloud hanging over your head all the time. Although on some blogs, I won't mention their names, people like to have a black cloud hanging over their heads all the time, and the blacker the better. But that's not the diner. We try to keep it happy.
I think
Yeah,
thinking about it, there is one thing that could perhaps unite the blogosphere, and I think if there was a little less big egos around, you might get more collaboration and discussion between various bloggers. I think there's a lot of big egos wanting to be the big fish in the small pond. That's one barrier that I see.
I've seen that barrier firsthand, and so getting various bloggers to cooperate and to try to work together is not always an easy task either. But at least my friends Steve here and Hugo have been very cooperative and very helpful. And provide a lot of great information, great blogs for me to cross-post. So that works out great as far as the diner is concerned, too. Anyhow, we don't know what's going to happen next week or next year precisely, other than the fact that it's probably going to be worse tomorrow than it is today.
A little bit.
And on that note, I will head into the 4th year for the diner. I'll see all of you out there, and I'll see my friends again back here on another Collapse Cafe sometime in the future. Don't know when. And that's all to do. This time until next time, here on the Doomstead Diner. And boom.